I never thought my own sister would look at me like I was the help. Elena stood at the top of the Grandview Estate's sweeping staircase, dressed in white silk and dripping in heirloom jewels, lips curled in disdain. "You're not on the list," she said coldly, gesturing to the security guard like I was a threat, not her sister. The man didn't move, but his posture shifted, blocking the entrance, with the quiet finality of someone used to denying people access. "You'll ruin the aesthetic," Elena added, her voice as brittle as the crystal chandeliers above. Before I continue narrating the story of Sarah Chin, please consider giving this video a like, share it, and subscribe to the channel. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words got caught somewhere between disbelief and rising shame. The guests filed past me in gowns and tuxedos, avoiding eye contact like I was contagious. I caught the eye of Mrs. Chin from church, who hesitated, her hand reaching for mine before her husband tugged her along. The air was heavy with perfume and pretense, and I suddenly felt like I was standing barefoot on broken glass. Elena's fiancé, Caleb, appeared beside her, placing a possessive hand on her lower back, as if to remind her who she belonged to now. "You need to leave," the security guard said firmly, his hand just brushing my shoulder. I couldn't move at first, feet locked in place as memories flooded in. Elena begging me to stay up late with her during finals week, Elena crying in my arms after Mom and Dad's funeral, Elena dancing with me in the kitchen to 80s love songs on rainy Sundays. "Sarah," she said, softer now but still without warmth, "you wouldn't understand. This is about image." That was when I realized my sister didn't see me as family anymore. She saw me as a liability. The walk back to my car felt longer than it should have, heels clicking on cobblestone like drumbeats of humiliation. I sat behind the wheel, hands gripping it so tightly my knuckles turned white. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I drove home in silence, the engine's hum a dull echo against the noise in my head. At my apartment, I poured a glass of wine and stared at the midnight blue dress I'd spent an entire paycheck on. The fabric looked limp now, stained with the day's rejection. I peeled it off like a second skin I no longer needed and threw on sweats and a hoodie. My laptop glowed to life, and I found myself typing Caleb's name into the search bar with slow, deliberate keystrokes. "Caleb Sterling," I whispered, watching the results load like a prophecy. The man had a perfect digital footprint. Headshots, panel talks, glowing reviews of his tech firm, Meridian Innovations. But something didn't sit right. I dug deeper, bypassing the first few pages of glossy PR. A buried forum post from a disgruntled contractor mentioned irregular payments. A Yelp review from a former receptionist claimed, "Caleb Sterling isn't who he says he is." I cross-checked the company's business address and found it registered to a WeWork space in the financial district, not the glass tower he claimed to operate from. My heart started to race. I pulled out a notepad and began jotting down connections, inconsistencies, timelines. My job in forensic accounting had trained me well. Follow the paper trail, and it will always lead you to the truth. The next morning, I called Marcus, a colleague from work I trusted. "I need you to help me investigate someone," I said, skipping pleasantries. He didn't ask questions, just told me to meet him at the office after hours. That night, we pored over documents, credit reports, and internal filings. "Sarah," Marcus said, pointing to his screen, "this guy's been using 2 different legal names." "Sterling is an alias," I asked, even though I already knew. "Real name's Caleb Morrison," Marcus confirmed. "Changed it 5 years ago after some sketchy SEC investigations in Florida mysteriously vanished." I sat back in my chair, the pieces snapping together like a cursed puzzle. He's hiding something big. The next day, I skipped work and drove to Riverside Commons, a rundown apartment complex on the edge of the city. A woman named Valentina Rodriguez lived there, the name tagged in photos Caleb had posted before wiping his personal Instagram account. She opened the door with caution, a visible bump under her faded hoodie. "You're Elena's sister," she said instantly, eyes narrowing. "You have her face, but not her ice." We sat in her cramped living room, surrounded by discount store baby items and the sharp scent of vanilla air freshener. Valentina handed me her phone with trembling fingers. "Read these," she said, and I did. Thousands of messages, promises, lies. Caleb had told her she was his future, had named their unborn son Sebastian, had promised her a house, a ring, a family, all while planning a royal wedding with my sister. He said Elena was business, Valentina whispered, voice cracking, that her last name would get him clients in legal circles. He promised once he secured certain contracts, he'd leave her. I couldn't breathe. My sister was being used, just like Valentina had been, just like so many others probably had before. Back at home, I stared at the wine bottle again and reached instead for a notebook. I mapped out a plan. Elena wouldn't listen to warnings. She never had. But there was one place she couldn't ignore the truth. In front of 200 guests, photographers, and a minister holding a microphone. I called James Morrison, a client I'd once helped through a financial nightmare involving stolen cars and a crooked CFO. He owed me. I need the most expensive vehicle you've got, I told him. Make it dramatic. He didn't ask why, just laughed. You're getting the Phantom, white, custom, $2 million. The morning of the wedding, I arrived at Valentina's apartment with a purple dress and a flat iron. You're coming with me, I said. She stared at the fabric like it was spun gold. I don't have heels, she whispered. Then you'll wear flats, I replied, smoothing her hair. Because this isn't about fashion. It's about truth. Valentina stood in front of the cracked mirror and pulled her shoulders back. The purple dress hugged her bump gently, the color one Elena used to adore before Caleb convinced her beige was more marketable. I slipped on my own navy sheath dress, understated but firm. The Rolls-Royce Phantom gleamed outside like a chariot of justice. We stepped into it like warriors. Traffic was thick, but we timed it perfectly. As guests were seated and the music shifted to the opening chords of the wedding march, the Phantom purred to a stop outside the estate. The valet gawked. The guard at the gate blinked twice, and then we stepped out. 2 women, 1 secret, and a truth too heavy to ignore. Subscribe to hear what is about to happen next. The doors to the estate opened just as the quartet reached the bridge of the wedding march. Elena's voice rang out from inside, crisp and commanding. Begin. The procession now. Guests shifted in their chairs. Phones discreetly raised to record what was expected to be a picture-perfect ceremony. The estate's marble floor reflected the crystal chandeliers overhead, turning the room into a prism of artificial opulence. Then the music faltered slightly, just as Valentina stepped into view. The chatter stilled. Dresses rustled like whispers, and heads turned in unison as the bride's sister and a visibly pregnant woman walked arm in arm down the center aisle. We weren't invited, but our presence commanded the moment, turning every eye toward the unraveling lie. Elena stood beneath a flowered arch, the light from the glass windows illuminating the beads on her gown like frozen tears. Caleb's eyes widened, recognition flickering as he took a half-step forward. "Valentina?" Caleb said, voice cracking with disbelief, loud enough for the first few rows to hear. Elena turned sharply to him, confusion painted across her face in soft strokes of shock and suspicion. She followed his gaze and froze, her body going unnaturally still. A gasp rippled from the left side of the room where some of her law school friends sat. One of them dropped a glass, the sharp shatter echoing like a warning shot. Valentina didn't flinch. She kept her head high, her left hand resting protectively over her belly, the other clutching mine tightly. My heels clicked in tandem with hers, rhythmic and sure, carrying us both toward the front like we belonged there. The Phantom may have delivered us, but the truth was the real thunder. Caleb's face lost all color, the tan from his fake conference trip 2 weeks ago now rendered meaningless. Elena's lips parted slightly as we approached, her breath caught between denial and realization. "Sarah," she whispered, but her voice was barely audible. I stopped a few feet away from the altar, giving her a moment to take in what stood before her. Valentina cleared her throat, the smallest gesture commanding silence from 200 guests. "My name is Valentina Rodriguez," she began, her voice strong and unmistakably steady. "I am carrying Caleb's child, a boy he promised would grow up in a home filled with love and security." The words didn't come out rushed or bitter. They came out clean, carved from weeks of practiced truth. He told me Elena was temporary, a connection he needed to grow his business. He said once she signed the contract giving him access to her family's legal contacts, he would end things. Murmurs swept through the crowd like wildfire. Elena's knees wobbled, and I instinctively stepped forward, but she waved me off. Her shoulders straightened with visible effort, her mind clearly racing. "Caleb," she said, not turning toward him, "is she telling the truth?" Her question hung in the air like a gavel waiting to fall. Caleb's mouth opened, but only a dry puff of sound escaped. His gaze darted from Elena to Valentina to the watching guests, like a man caught in an avalanche of his own making. "It's complicated," he said finally, a phrase so limp it drew actual laughter from someone near the back. "There were misunderstandings. I didn't want to hurt anyone." That was when Elena finally turned to look at him. "You told me she was your housekeeper," she said slowly, her words brittle and razor-sharp. "You said she tried to trap you by getting pregnant, that she'd faked paternity, forged emails, made threats." Caleb flinched with each accusation, his hands twitching at his sides. "And yet here she is, calm, pregnant, and entirely believable." Elena's voice cracked slightly, but she didn't back down. Valentina reached into her purse and pulled out a thick envelope, handing it to me without a word. I stepped forward and placed it in Elena's hands. "Screenshots of texts," I said, my voice cold. "Voice recordings, too. He said the baby's name would be Sebastian, after her father." Elena opened the envelope and flipped through the first few pages, her face unreadable. The room had gone completely silent, even the children too young to understand sensing the tension. The photographer, Elena's college friend Diana, moved like a ghost along the edge, capturing every detail. A single camera flash punctuated the moment Elena let the envelope fall to the floor. She looked up at Caleb, and for a second, she was just my little sister again, devastated and furious. "I wore our mother's necklace today," she said, voice trembling, "because I thought she'd want to be here in spirit. But she wouldn't have stood in the same room as you." Caleb reached for her, a stupid, reflexive gesture. She stepped back with finality. "Get out of my wedding." It wasn't a scream, it wasn't even loud, but it was absolute. Caleb looked at me then, the cornered predator glance of a man who'd run out of exits. He took one step forward, only to find Aunt Margaret standing between us, cane in hand and eyes blazing. "You do not move," she said, voice like a war drum. Caleb froze. Behind him, his groomsmen quietly stepped aside, choosing distance over loyalty. Valentina let out a shaky breath and stepped back, gripping my arm as though only now realizing how close this all came to falling apart. Elena stood rooted, the bride who refused to break. The officiant cleared his throat awkwardly, sweat beading at his temples. "Should I cancel the ceremony?" he asked, voice meek and uncertain. Elena blinked, like she'd forgotten anyone else existed in the room. "No," she said slowly, drawing herself up. "This isn't a wedding anymore, but it is a reckoning." Elena stepped down from the altar, the bouquet still lying forgotten on the floor behind her. Her heels clicked sharply as she walked past Caleb without so much as a glance, each step a refusal to be broken. I moved to meet her halfway, instinct guiding me like it had so many times before. She paused in front of me, eyes glassy but spine straight, and reached for my hand. "Take me home," she said quietly, not to Caleb, not to anyone else, just to me. Behind us, murmurs rose again, louder now, no longer whispers but full-blown speculation. Valentina stood off to the side, one hand still resting on her belly, watching everything unfold with the tired eyes of someone who'd already imagined it all. Caleb didn't move, didn't speak, just stood rooted at the front like a mannequin in a suit 2 sizes too tight. His silence said more than any excuse ever could. Rachel, Amy, and Jennifer approached Elena gently, flanking her like protective wings. The guests began rising, some heading for the exits while others lingered, too stunned to move. I glanced at Valentina, who gave a small nod, her expression unreadable but not broken. We walked toward the side entrance, avoiding the chaos near the main doors, and stepped into the hallway leading to the estate's private exit. Outside, the Rolls-Royce still waited, gleaming like a prize none of us really wanted. Elena paused before getting in, looking back at the grand building where her life had just split in two. "I don't want to go back to the penthouse," she said, her voice level but low. "It's not mine anymore. It never really was." She turned to Valentina, who blinked in surprise. "Do you have room for me tonight?" Valentina hesitated, clearly overwhelmed, but then nodded. "There's a couch," she replied softly. "It's not much." "It's enough," Elena said, climbing into the car without waiting for a second invitation. I followed, and Valentina slid in after us, her dress smoothing over her belly as she shifted to get comfortable. The door closed with a satisfying thud, and the driver pulled away from the estate in silence. We didn't speak for the first 10 minutes, each of us staring out opposite windows like passengers on a spaceship leaving a ruined planet. The bridal makeup on Elena's face was beginning to smudge, her lipstick worn off completely, but she didn't seem to notice. "He changed the music on my phone," Elena said suddenly, her voice quiet. "Took off all my playlists. Said my taste was too juvenile. Replaced everything with classical string versions of Coldplay and John Mayer." Valentina let out a breath that was almost a laugh, almost a sob. "He told me real music didn't need lyrics." They both laughed then, dry, brittle sounds that somehow lightened the air. "I thought I was crazy," Valentina said. "I started doubting my own memories." Elena nodded slowly, the words hitting something deep. "So did I." I didn't say anything, just reached for Elena's hand and gave it a squeeze. By the time we reached Riverside Commons, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the broken concrete lot. The Phantom looked painfully out of place in front of the crumbling stairwell, like a diamond ring tossed into a sandbox. We helped Valentina up the stairs first, her steps careful and slow. Elena followed behind, lifting the hem of her ruined wedding dress so it wouldn't drag. She didn't complain about the peeling paint or the flickering hallway light. Valentina unlocked the door, and the scent of lavender and vanilla met us instantly, softening the roughness of everything else. Elena stepped inside and looked around as though entering a sacred space. "This feels more like home than that penthouse ever did," she murmured, brushing her fingers along the edge of the worn couch. Valentina shrugged, embarrassed, and moved to light a candle on the table. "I try to make it comfortable," she said. I headed to the kitchen and filled 3 mismatched mugs with water from the filter jug. We sat in silence for a while, the kind that wasn't awkward but necessary. Elena finally peeled off her shoes and set them by the door, a small symbolic gesture. "He proposed to me in Paris," she said, eyes focused on nothing in particular. "But I was the one who bought the tickets, booked the hotel, paid for the dinners." "He told me Paris was cliché," Valentina said, cracking her knuckles one by one. "Said he preferred places with economic potential." I reached into my purse and pulled out my notebook, flipping it open. "Then it's time we build a case," I said. "Not just for us, but for everyone he's hurt." Elena straightened at that, her eyes sharpening like a blade being drawn. "You already found some things, didn't you?" I nodded. "Ghost employees, fake leases, misappropriated funds. He's not just a liar, he's a criminal." Valentina reached for her phone, scrolling rapidly. "I've been saving everything," she said. "Texts, voice memos, even photos of his visits." She paused and held the screen out to Elena, showing an image of Caleb asleep on Valentina's couch. "That was 2 months ago, same week he told you he had to fly to London for meetings." Elena stared at the photo for a long moment, then simply said, "Let's burn his empire down." We worked late into the night, cross-referencing messages, contracts, business listings. Elena took over the couch with her laptop, turning it into a command center of sticky notes and timelines. Valentina hovered between us with bowls of popcorn and prenatal vitamins. I scanned tax records and financial disclosures, identifying patterns even the IRS had missed. We were three women with nothing left to lose and everything to expose. At 3:14 a.m., Elena turned to me, her face lit only by the blue glow of her screen. "There's a woman in Phoenix," she said. "Her name is Jenna, and she has a son, 3 years old. I found a photo of Caleb with them dated last year." Valentina's breath hitched. He told me he hadn't seen his ex in years. "I think it's time we call her," I said, opening a new browser tab. Valentina whispered something too low for us to hear, rubbing her belly in slow circles. Elena reached over and touched her hand gently. "You're not alone anymore," she said. "None of us are." And for the first time since that disastrous wedding, I believed her. Subscribe to hear what is about to happen next. The next morning, Elena stood barefoot in Valentina's kitchen, stirring instant oatmeal into boiling water like it was a courtroom ritual. The wedding dress was folded neatly on the couch, beads catching weak light from the dusty window. She'd washed off her makeup and tied her hair back in a knot that looked like it had been secured in the middle of a breakdown. "I don't know how I ever believed him," she said, not looking up. "He told me she was a threat, Sarah, that Valentina was trying to ruin his life." I leaned against the counter, sipping bitter coffee from a chipped mug that read, "Number 1 Dad." Valentina sat on the edge of the couch, arms wrapped protectively around her belly, watching Elena like a woman caught between forgiveness and exhaustion. "He made me believe I was the villain," she said, voice rough with sleep. "Every time I asked for clarity, he turned it into an attack." Elena gave a small, sharp laugh. "He used the same strategy on me," she said, placing the pot on a cold burner. Every concern I had was labeled emotional overreaction. She turned toward us with the ladle still in her hand like a gavel. "Well, I'm ready to overreact in public and in writing." We all smiled then, the kind of smile shared between survivors, still bruised but breathing. By noon, we were seated on the living room floor with our laptops, folders, and legal pads. Valentina had changed into soft leggings and a t-shirt stretched over her bump, her belly moving now and then as Sebastian kicked. Elena had reclaimed her sharpness, back straight, typing furiously, scanning contracts Caleb had manipulated her into signing. I watched them both and felt something shift, like the ground under all of us was finally stabilizing. "We need someone to verify these documents," Elena said. "Marcus," I answered without hesitation. "He's already been helping me cross-reference the financials." Elena nodded. "Get him on a call. I want to walk him through the misappropriation lines he buried under marketing codes." Valentina blinked at the jargon. "He made you sign financials?" Elena turned to her. "Every quarter. Said it was for transparency between partners." Marcus answered my call within seconds, voice already tinged with urgency. "I found more," he said without waiting for pleasantries. "There are offshore accounts tied to shell companies in Belize and Panama. Names match Valentina's, Elena's, and another woman, Jenna Marsh." I raised my eyebrows. "The woman from Phoenix?" "Same," he confirmed. "She had a son with him too. Caleb set up a fund under her name, then used it to move money across borders." Elena inhaled sharply. If her name is tied to illegal transfers, she could be implicated without even knowing. Valentina looked pale. "We need to contact her." It took 3 hours and a dozen social media dead ends before we found a bakery in Phoenix, tagged in Jenna's photos. Elena called and asked to speak to her, voice cool and practiced. "Hi, I'm not a customer, but I believe you might be in danger," she said plainly when Jenna answered. The silence on the other end was long, stretching into something that could have easily turned to denial. But then came the soft reply. "Did he lie to you too?" Jenna asked. "He always said I was the only one, that his past relationships were complicated, full of trauma and manipulation." Elena's jaw clenched. "He told me he'd never been in love before me." I could hear Jenna sigh through the speaker. "He said the same thing to me, then emptied my savings and left." Jenna agreed to email us her documentation, screenshots, wire transfers, even a voice recording. Her voice shook when she spoke of her son, Noah, and how Caleb had promised to build a future around him. "My boy still asks when he's coming home," she said. "I told him Caleb was away for work. I didn't know he was getting married." Valentina let out a low breath. "You're not alone anymore." With 3 women now telling identical stories, the pattern was undeniable. Marcus looped in an attorney he trusted, a woman named Lila who specialized in financial fraud and digital evidence. She set up a secure Dropbox and asked us to upload every document we had. Elena coordinated everything, her tone clipped and commanding, organizing dates, emails, and wire trail summaries like court exhibits. The more we uncovered, the more Caleb's empire cracked. Meridian Innovations is a front. Marcus told us that evening over Zoom, his screen split between spreadsheets and scanned affidavits. There are no real investors, no patents, no functioning products, just recycled ideas and shiny language to lure in targets. Elena shook her head. "He sold me on revolutionizing digital arbitration. He said we were building something no one else could touch." Valentina snorted softly. "He said that about my pregnancy." Layla agreed to meet with the FBI the following morning and advised we all document written testimonies to submit formally. "Don't worry about language," she said. "Just tell the truth, exactly as it happened." I typed mine up that night, fingers trembling more than I expected. I recounted everything. From the first time I met Caleb at Elena's birthday dinner to the moment I stepped into the wedding with Valentina on my arm. When I finished, I hit send and stared at the confirmation screen for a long time. The next morning, Elena received a letter delivered by courier. No return address, just her name in sharp black ink. Inside was a single photo, Caleb standing at an international airport terminal, face hidden partially behind sunglasses. Behind him, a departure board listed flights to non-extradition countries. A yellow sticky note was attached with 5 typed words. "You've made a powerful mistake." Elena stared at it for 10 seconds before slowly folding the photo and sliding it back into the envelope. "He's running," she said, "but not because he's scared of prison. He's scared of us, because we made him visible." Valentina placed her hand over her belly, her expression cold. "Let him run. We'll make sure nowhere is safe." We drove to Layla's office that afternoon, the 3 of us side by side in my sedan. No luxury car this time, just resolve. Elena wore a blazer she'd borrowed from a friend, paired with jeans and fury. Valentina had braided her hair back, her posture tall even as her belly shifted with every bump in the road. I glanced at them as we waited at a red light, realizing I wasn't just looking at 2 women burned by the same fire. I was looking at soldiers. And I was proud to march with them. Lila's office overlooked the city skyline, all glass and chrome, and the quiet confidence of someone who knew how to dismantle men like Caleb. She greeted us in a navy suit, her hair in a sleek bun, and led us into a conference room that smelled faintly of eucalyptus and printer ink. "Everything you've provided checks out," she said, sliding a thick folder across the table. "There's more than enough for federal attention." Elena took the folder with steady hands, but her jaw was tight. "The FBI has opened a preliminary file," Lila continued, clicking to a projection screen displaying Caleb's known aliases. "We're coordinating with financial crimes and cyber fraud units across 3 states. The scale of this is going to get a lot bigger." Valentina shifted in her seat, one hand at the base of her belly. "Will they arrest him?" "Eventually," Layla said, not unkindly. "But Caleb's smart and slippery. He's used shell corporations and VPN masked locations for years. Our best move is continued documentation while they track his movements through flagged accounts." Elena leaned back, her hands laced together in her lap. "And in the meantime, we do what?" "We prepare for discovery," Layla replied. "Because once the charges are public, every journalist in the country will come looking for statements." I glanced at Valentina, who was already pale. "Can that put us in danger?" "If he returns, maybe," Lila admitted. "But right now, his ego won't let him come near the fallout." When we left the office, it had started to rain. Fat, warm drops that stuck to our clothes but did nothing to chill the fire burning beneath our skin. Valentina walked slowly, her hand pressing into her lower back. Elena held the umbrella above them both, silent but close. I walked slightly ahead, scanning the street out of habit, eyes flicking over unfamiliar cars. "Do you think he's watching us?" Elena asked suddenly. "Possibly," I replied. "But if he was nearby, he'd already have tried something." "No," Valentina said quietly. "He'd wait until we thought we'd won. Then he'd strike, all charm and apology." Elena looked over at her, rainwater dripping from her umbrella. "He's not charming anymore. He's a virus, and we're the cure." Back at Valentina's apartment, we found a manila envelope taped to the door with no markings. Elena ripped it open, revealing a printed article draft titled, "The Double Life of Caleb Sterling, Wedding Scandals, Fake Startups, and the Women Left Behind." "It's from Amy," Elena murmured, pulling out a note. "She's working on a piece for the Legal Insider. Wants to publish next month." Valentina looked stricken. "Will that put Sebastian in the spotlight?" "She said she'll anonymize details," Elena explained. "But she wants permission before running anything." I took the note and read through Amy's handwriting. Concise, journalistic, and careful. She's not exploiting this, she's exposing it. Valentina rubbed her temples. "Let me think about it. I don't want my son's name used in a sentence with that man unless it's for justice." The following morning, my phone buzzed with a call from Marcus. "I just found something new," he said, breathless. "There's a wire transfer Caleb initiated 3 days before the wedding. It's encrypted through 3 holding companies, but the origin links back to a dormant account under Elena's name." Elena, who was pouring cereal into a chipped bowl, froze. "How much?" I asked, already fearing the answer. $250,000, Marcus said grimly. "Pulled from a trust fund your parents set up." Elena's face went pale, her spoon clattering against the counter. "He accessed Dad's legacy," she whispered. "That money was for education, for family emergencies, not for his scams." Valentina stared at her, stunned. How would he even know about the account? Elena swallowed hard. "I told him when we first started dating. I trusted him, said it made me feel safe knowing we had backup savings." I reached out and touched her shoulder. "We're going to get it back." "No," she said, straightening. "We're going to take everything he stole and make him choke on it." Later that week, Jenna arrived in Chicago with her son Noah in tow. He was 3 and adorable, clinging to her leg with a stuffed dinosaur in his hand and eyes too wide for his age. "He still asks about Caleb," she said softly, after introductions were made. "Says he misses Saturday pancakes." I've been trying to erase that man from our lives, but kids remember the wrong parts. Valentina sat beside her on the couch, watching Noah play with a wooden puzzle Elena had dug out from storage. "Sebastian will probably ask questions one day too," she said. "And I won't have to lie. I'll say I stopped the damage before it reached him." Jenna gave a grateful smile. "Then let's stop it together." The next 3 days became a hive of activity. Emails sent, affidavits signed, timelines charted in red ink on whiteboards. Elena contacted victims through forums, carefully verifying identities and guiding them toward Lila's legal process. Valentina helped digitize handwritten notes and decode Caleb's nicknames for transactions. I managed the spreadsheets and narrative flow for the case report. Jenna watched the children when we needed silence, creating crafts with construction paper and crayons as the rest of us hunted ghosts. Then came the day Elena received an alert from a financial tracking system Marcus had rigged. "He's trying to access another account," she announced, staring at her screen. "This one belongs to a woman in San Diego, Nancy Wu." Layla called her immediately and confirmed everything matched the pattern. Nancy, shaken but sharp, agreed to join the case. 13 victims so far. Layla summarized that night. 5 states, 7 aliases, over 12 million stolen across 6 years. Elena sat back in her chair, exhausted but victorious. "This isn't just fraud," she said. "It's predation," Valentina nodded. "And he thought we'd never find each other." But we had found each other. Through grief, betrayal, and one catastrophic wedding, we'd built a bridge of truth between strangers. Now we had names, evidence, patterns, and voices loud enough to shake courtrooms. And we were just getting started. Subscribe to hear what is about to happen next. The apartment had become something between a war room and a daycare, with sticky notes on the walls and finger paints on the table. Elena's laptop rarely closed, Valentina's ankles had started swelling from sitting too long, and Jenna alternated between playing with Noah and proofreading affidavits. We took turns making meals, basic pasta, grilled cheese, soup, whatever. Didn't take too long to prepare between document reviews and phone interviews. At night, I lay awake on the pull-out couch, thinking about the first time I'd met Caleb. It was at a tapas bar for Elena's birthday, and he'd smiled at me like I was a waitress taking his order, not her sister. Now his crimes were piling up like bodies in a detective novel, and every thread we pulled exposed another. Marcus had created a flowchart with arrows and aliases, the digital equivalent of string on a corkboard. Caleb Morrison, aka Caleb Sterling, had at least 4 former addresses under different names. He'd filed LLC paperwork in Wyoming, Delaware, and Nevada, classic states for anonymity. Each business claimed to offer consulting or executive services, but none had real clients. Layla sent word that the FBI was formally opening a joint investigation with financial crimes and interstate wire fraud units. Elena read the email aloud at the kitchen table while Noah napped, and Valentina stretched her legs on the ottoman. "They're asking us to formally testify in 3 weeks," she said, voice steady. "First round of interviews will be confidential, off-record, just fact-building." Valentina looked up. "What about our safety?" Lila had already arranged legal shields for the victims, including temporary restraining orders filed preemptively against Caleb under his known names. Elena filed hers first, the process oddly cathartic. Clicking submit on a man she once planned to marry. Valentina's followed, and Jenna's after that, each one a tiny shield against someone who'd once held their futures hostage. I signed on as a secondary petitioner, citing direct involvement and potential retaliation. The document felt heavy when I printed it. 3 nights later, I woke to the sound of Elena crying on the bathroom floor. She didn't sob loud. It was a muffled kind of grief, her arms wrapped around her knees, phone glowing beside her like a dying star. I knelt beside her without asking questions, just sat there as she handed me her phone. Caleb had sent a message from a burner number, short and cruel. "You think this wins you something? You were just the clean name." She didn't say anything as I read it. The air was thick with something more than rage, betrayal layered with old memories. "He's bluffing," I whispered. "He knows he's losing control." Elena nodded slowly, but her silence said everything. It still hurt, even now, even with truth on our side. In the morning, Jenna made pancakes shaped like stars, and Valentina brewed chamomile tea like it was a potion. Noah ran between our legs in a superhero cape while Elena returned to her laptop, red-eyed but focused. Marcus called to say that another victim had surfaced in Baltimore, an anesthesiologist named Priya who'd invested in one of Caleb's digital arbitration scams. She lost her condo, Marcus said. She's willing to testify, but she's scared. He told her she'd ruin his life if she talked. "She won't be alone," Elena replied firmly. "None of us are." Priya joined the shared Google Drive within the hour, uploading scans and screenshots faster than we could organize them. Valentina started drafting a timeline that tracked every fake company's lifespan, each one linking back to the same fraudulent business plan. The pattern was undeniable now. A week later, I was walking back from the pharmacy with Valentina's prenatal vitamins when I noticed a black SUV parked across the street. It wasn't unusual for cars to idle there, but this one had tinted windows and an out-of-state plate. I slowed my pace, heart thudding as I fumbled with my keys. Inside the apartment, I pulled Elena aside and described the vehicle. "Do you think it's him?" I asked. "It could be someone watching on his behalf," she answered, her expression instantly alert. "We're becoming a liability to him, especially now that the case is gaining traction." That afternoon, Layla arranged for us to temporarily relocate to an apartment building with better security. We packed everything in 2 hours. Laptops, diapers, whiteboards, folders. The new apartment was smaller, but newer. with a working elevator and a front desk that required ID for entry. Jenna set Noah up in the corner with a pile of coloring books, while Valentina tried to get comfortable on a borrowed recliner. "This feels like a bunker," she said, half laughing. "That's because it is," Elena replied, glancing out the window. "But it's one we control." At 8:42 p.m., Lila called with news that made us all sit up. Interpol flagged Caleb's passport, she said. He attempted to fly from Costa Rica to Dubai under a false name, but backed out last minute. Elena stood, pacing the kitchen tile in bare feet. "That means he's watching us. He's waiting for the story to go quiet." But the story wasn't going anywhere. Amy's article had gone viral within 2 hours of publication. She kept her promise to Valentina and Jenna. Names were anonymized, timelines blurred, but the message was clear. He ruined lives across 5 states, and no one stopped him, until now. Elena read the piece 5 times before printing it and pinning it to the fridge. "Let this be the first headline of many," she said. The fallout was immediate. News outlets started reaching out through Layla's office, requesting interviews, exclusives, deep dives. Caleb's past associates tried to distance themselves quickly, removing LinkedIn endorsements and scrubbing photos from websites. One startup founder even issued a public statement claiming he'd been, quote, by Mr. Morrison's charisma and falsified credentials. Marcus smirked when he read it. Funny how no one noticed the lies when they were getting funding. Valentina's OB appointment came the next morning, and I drove her there in my rusted sedan while Elena stayed behind for a conference call with federal agents. At the clinic, Valentina clutched her belly as we waited for her name to be called. "He never came to one of these," she said softly. "Not once." Said doctor visits made him anxious. I reached over and squeezed her hand. "You're not doing this alone anymore," I said. "Your son will have women in his life who show up." When the doctor entered, she smiled at Valentina and asked if I was her sister. Valentina answered before I could. She is now. The ultrasound room was dimly lit, with soft music playing from a speaker in the corner and the scent of antiseptic clinging to every surface. Valentina lay back on the table, her shirt folded neatly over her bump, fingers laced tightly on her chest. I sat beside her, holding her free hand, watching the grainy image on the screen flicker to life. "There he is," the technician said, smiling gently as she adjusted the wand. Sebastian kicked, a tiny flurry of motion visible to us both, and Valentina let out a breath that sounded like hope. After the appointment, we drove back in silence, the road wet from an earlier drizzle, headlights casting long shadows. At a red light, Valentina finally spoke. "Do you think they'll arrest him before the baby's born?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't want to bring Sebastian into a world where Caleb still has power." "I think justice is slow," I said honestly, "but it's coming." She nodded, one hand resting on her belly, the other gripping the seatbelt like a lifeline. When we got back, Elena was on the phone with Lila, pacing the apartment and scribbling notes on a legal pad. "He moved money again," she said the moment we walked in, this time under an account linked to a nonprofit he registered in Puerto Rico. "He's laundering through charity fronts?" Valentina asked, stunned. Elena nodded, her jaw tight. "We flagged it with the task force. They're building a case of financial conspiracy now, not just fraud." I sat down beside her and looked at the list of new shell organizations. They all had sanitized names: Hope Bridge, Future Seed, Global Hearts. "His whole brand is emotional manipulation," I muttered. "He builds illusions, not businesses." Elena flipped the page. "He preyed on every vulnerable point: grief, ambition, loneliness." Valentina joined us at the table, her expression sharper than I'd seen it in days. "Then let's make sure the story he's writing ends before my son is born." That night, we received a package addressed to Elena's firm. Inside was a single unsigned letter and a USB drive. The letter read, "You think you know everything, but some stories are bigger than your little vendetta. Walk away, or you'll wish you had." Elena inserted the drive into her laptop, her hands steady, her mouth a flat line. The screen filled with files, folders named by initials, dates, amounts. "This is blackmail," she said, clicking through one labeled JR. "He's documenting his leverage over every woman he conned." The files were disturbingly detailed, recorded calls, edited screenshots, manipulated photos. One folder labeled VR made Valentina go still. She leaned in, brows furrowed, and opened it. The images were real, but out of context. Her in a hospital hallway, her old text messages cut mid-sentence to look like threats. "He was preparing to flip the narrative," she whispered. "Make me look like the unstable one, just in case." Elena sat back, her fingers steepled under her chin. "We don't let this scare us," she said. "We use it. We show the FBI he's already trying to intimidate witnesses." I nodded. We were never playing his game, but now we write the rules. The next morning, Layla arranged a secure drop to hand off the drive. Federal agents retrieved it within hours, confirming it would strengthen the ongoing case. Jenna, Priya, and the other women were updated through a secure group thread, and the shared sense of empowerment surged. "He thought this would break us," Priya wrote, "but it just made us louder." Elena printed the message and pinned it next to Amy's article on the fridge. News of the investigation had reached the press in waves, each headline more damning than the last. "Serial conman targets professional women in multi-state scheme." "Luxury wedding collapse leads to federal probe. Women unite to bring down Caleb Morrison." The comment sections were flooded with support and stories from readers who'd faced similar manipulation. Valentina read them aloud sometimes, her voice warm with pride. Then came the call none of us expected. Caleb's mother. Elena answered with her lawyer voice, ready for a fight, but the voice on the other end trembled. "I didn't know," Mrs. Morrison said. "Not the scale, not the lies, but I should have." Elena said nothing for a moment, then asked simply, "Why are you calling me?" "I want to help," the older woman said. "He's burned bridges in our family for years. You're not the first he's lied to, just the first to fight back this hard." Elena's shoulder softened slightly. "Then, help by testifying. Or submit a written statement. We don't need sympathy. We need truth." By the end of the week, Lila had over a dozen formal statements in her possession. The timeline had tripled in length, connecting lies with deposits, promises with betrayals. The FBI had enough to issue a formal arrest warrant. "We're just waiting for a confirmed location," Lila said. "Interpol is coordinating with local law enforcement." That night, I sat beside Valentina as she packed a hospital bag, just in case. "I still feel like he might win somehow," she said, folding a tiny pair of socks. "Not because he's smart, but because men like him always seem to slip through." I didn't have a pretty answer, just reached for the socks and helped fold. "Maybe he will get away for a while," I said, "but he won't be able to hide forever. Not when a dozen women know what he's done. Not when we keep telling the story." She zipped the bag and smiled faintly. "Sebastian's going to grow up with women who fight." In the corner of the room, Noah held up a drawing he'd made, a stick-figure family with big smiles and a tiny red car. "That's you," he told Jenna, "and that's Aunt Sarah and Aunt Elena and the baby." He pointed to a smaller figure in Valentina's belly. "And that's the boy who made the bad man go away." We all laughed, but it wasn't empty. Because he wasn't wrong. Subscribe to hear what is about to happen next. The morning the arrest was made, we were all in pajamas, eating cereal around the kitchen island, Noah carefully balancing blueberries on his spoon. Elena's phone buzzed first, then mine, then Valentina's, each of us exchanging startled looks before checking our screens. Layla's message was only 4 words long. "They've got him." Finally. Elena nearly dropped her spoon, eyes wide, hands frozen mid-air. Valentina let out a slow breath, her fingers tightening around the edge of the counter. "He was in Portugal," Elena said aloud, scanning the rest of the message. "Tried crossing into Spain under the name Caleb Warner." I blinked. "Warner? That wasn't even one of the aliases we found." "He keeps backup identities," Valentina murmured, reaching instinctively for her belly. "But not even a dozen names can save him now." Layla called within the hour, her voice electric with momentum. Interpol picked him up at the border, she confirmed. He tried to bribe the patrol agent. Bad move. The Portuguese authorities have agreed to extradition. The U.S. team is flying out to bring him back for federal charges. We sat there in stunned silence, the weight of the last few months settling over us in a rush. Elena finally moved first, grabbing the champagne bottle we'd been saving in the fridge, a cheap off-brand we bought weeks ago in cautious optimism. "Is it weird to celebrate?" she asked, already reaching for the cork. "No," Valentina said, smiling. "It's survival." The pop echoed through the apartment like a gunshot, and Noah squealed in delight, clapping his hands. Elena poured us each a half glass, sparkling apple cider for Valentina, and raised hers high. "To the end of running," she said, her voice firm but soft. "To the beginning of justice." We clinked our glasses, each of us tasting a small but hard-earned victory. As news of the arrest spread, media coverage exploded. Every outlet, from the New York Times to local blogs, scrambled to piece together the timeline. Lila managed press inquiries like a conductor leading a symphony, ensuring facts were accurate and victims protected. Elena gave a single interview, carefully scripted, calm, unwavering. "We're not just women scorned," she said. "We're women who refuse to stay silent." By the time Caleb landed in U.S. custody, the hashtag Truth Over Sterling was trending. Survivors shared their stories under it, even those who'd never met him, inspired by the ripple effect. Valentina read them aloud each night, her voice steady, her hand on her belly. "He told me love didn't require labels," one post read. What he meant was that accountability didn't either. Jenna flew home to Phoenix with Noah once her part of the deposition was complete, promising to return if charges moved to trial. "You saved us," she said at the airport, hugging us tightly. "You reminded me I wasn't crazy. That's more than I thought I'd ever get." Valentina squeezed her hand. "Now, you remind someone else." With Jenna gone, the apartment felt a little quieter, but not emptier. Lila called 2 days later with the preliminary list of charges: wire fraud, identity theft, tax evasion, conspiracy to commit financial crimes, and obstruction of justice. "Each one carries 5 to 20 years, she said. "He's facing a possible life sentence if they pursue the full scope." Elena didn't smile, just nodded. "That's not revenge. That's reality catching up." 2 weeks later, we received subpoenas to testify before the grand jury. Elena folded hers neatly and tucked it into her legal folder, as if it were just another piece of the puzzle. Valentina sat for a long time with hers unopened, resting against her belly like a weight. I watched her, unsure whether to speak, until she finally whispered, "Sebastian's due in less than a month. I don't know if I'll make it to court." Elena sat beside her and placed a hand over hers. "We'll record your testimony." Layla already confirmed it's admissible. Valentina nodded, still looking down. "I thought I'd feel triumphant," she said, "but all I feel is tired." I placed a blanket over her shoulders. "You don't have to win the war by yourself." That night, Elena drafted a formal statement on behalf of the victims, consolidating the voices of 13 women into one singular narrative. She read it aloud to us, each word chosen like a surgical strike, equal parts sorrow and steel. "He used affection as a transaction," she read, "and trust as leverage. We believed him because he made belief feel safe." Valentina's eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. As the grand jury convened, Caleb's legal team attempted a strategy shift, pleading for a settlement, citing mental health stress and unrealized trauma. Lila didn't blink. He wasn't confused. He was calculated. Elena added a line to her statement: "Manipulation isn't a condition, it's a decision." The judge allowed it into the official record. 3 days before the trial date was set, Valentina went into labor. We rushed her to the hospital at dawn, our carefully rehearsed calm unraveling the moment she winced in the back seat. Elena drove like a woman possessed, weaving through early morning traffic as I coached Valentina through her breathing. "You've got this," I said. "You're not alone." 6 hours later, Sebastian was born, 6 pounds, 11 ounces, with a scream that seemed to declare himself into the world. Valentina cradled him with trembling arms, tears slipping down her cheeks. "He's perfect," she whispered, "and you'll never have to wonder what strength looks like." Elena leaned over and kissed her forehead. "He'll grow up knowing exactly who he comes from." I held him last, his tiny fingers curling instinctively around mine. He looked like her, Valentina, but his eyes had something else in them too. Something steady, something that refused to be broken. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Sebastian slept most of that first night, bundled in a hospital bassinet beneath a knit blanket one of the nurses had gifted us. Valentina was exhausted, her eyelids fluttering as she drifted in and out of sleep. But her hand never strayed far from her son. Elena sat in the corner, still in her jeans and blazer from the drive over, typing notes for Layla on her laptop by the dim glow of a bedside lamp. I stood at the window, watching the city lights twinkle like they were blinking back at me, the air heavy with everything we'd survived. Somewhere across the globe, Caleb Morrison was in a holding cell, stripped of his fake names and finely tailored lies. Lila called mid-morning with the trial scheduled jury selection in 4 weeks, with the prosecution planning to lead with victim testimony. Elena adjusted her seat and scribbled the date on a napkin before Valentina even opened her eyes. "We'll prepare in advance," she said softly. "Video depositions first, then live statements. You don't have to do anything alone." Valentina looked down at her baby, fingers stroking the edge of his soft cap. "I want to do it," she said. "For him, for all of us." I nodded from across the room, knowing that strength wasn't always loud. Sometimes it wore hospital gowns and carried tiny heartbeats. Back at the apartment, the whiteboard was updated with new timelines, charges, and defense strategies we expected Caleb's team to attempt. Elena marked each victim with a blue star: Jenna, Priya, Nancy, and 10 others, some public, some anonymous. We'd become more than names on a spreadsheet. We were evidence. We were impact. Marcus forwarded a forensic report, linking Caleb to fraudulent real estate ventures using Elena's bar license and Jenna's business permits. "They're stacking charges," he explained. "He'll never be free again." Media requests flooded Lila's inbox, but Elena turned most of them down, choosing focus over fanfare. She did accept one feature for The Atlantic, a long-form interview about systemic emotional fraud and the digital age of deception. "This isn't about tabloid drama," she said. "It's about prevention. Women need to know these patterns." The interview was raw, unsensational, and devastatingly clear. Priya messaged the group chat after reading it. "I cried halfway through," she wrote. "Not because it hurt, but because it felt like someone finally put words to what I lived through." Valentina sent back 3 purple hearts and a photo of Sebastian yawning. "He's our reminder," she typed. "New life, no secrets." The message was pinned to the top of the thread. 3 weeks later, we returned to the courthouse where Elena had once passed the bar exam. The building loomed taller now, heavy with history and consequence, but this time she walked through its doors not as a student, but as a witness. I held her hand before we separated at the security line. "You're not here as the woman he used," I said. "You're here as the woman who stopped him." In the gallery, Valentina sat with Sebastian tucked into a sling, a knit blanket covering him against the courthouse chill. Behind her were Jenna and Marcus, and 2 more women who hadn't testified but had come to listen. Elena took the stand mid-morning, sworn in under the buzzing fluorescent lights and 100 watchful eyes. Her voice was clear, calm, and fierce. "He didn't steal my money," she said. "He stole my faith and my own instincts." The courtroom was silent as she walked the jury through contracts, emails, and emotional coercion. He knew exactly what he was doing. He targeted women who were rebuilding, who were tired, who wanted partnership, not pity. She never raised her voice, but it carried like a verdict through the room. Caleb's attorney tried to shake her, suggesting she'd been naive, even complicit. "I'm not ashamed of loving someone," she replied, "but I refuse to be shamed for believing in decency. That belief is why I'm standing here today. Because I know what decency is supposed to look like. I saw one juror nod, another scribble furiously in the margin of their notepad. When Elena stepped down, the room exhaled like it had been holding its breath. The next day, Valentina's video testimony was played, her voice softer but no less steady. He told me our child was a miracle, she said. Then spent my third trimester building a wedding with someone else. She held up a tiny onesie on screen, one that said Future CEO, and the jury visibly shifted. This was supposed to be our family's beginning. Instead, it's evidence. After each testimony, Caleb's expression didn't change. Not outrage, not remorse, just blank calculation. But when they played the voice recordings Layla had submitted, his promises to Valentina, his mockery of Elena, his mask cracked. For a second, he clenched his jaw too tight and gripped the table too hard, the only tells of a man who was finally, undeniably cornered. One juror glanced at him and shook her head. The prosecution rested the next morning. Closing arguments came fast. The lead attorney framed the case not just as fraud, but as serial psychological exploitation. This is not about romance gone wrong, she said. This is about weaponized affection and the system that failed to catch it until now. Caleb's defense tried for mitigation, claimed emotional instability, a fractured childhood, business ambition taken too far. The courtroom didn't buy it. After 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. Guilty on all counts, every single one. Caleb Morrison, also known as Caleb Sterling, Warner, and 5 other aliases, was remanded into custody immediately, his sentence pending. He looked back once as the verdict was read, but no one met his gaze. Outside the courthouse, press huddled behind barricades, flashbulbs popping like fireworks. Elena held a brief statement in her hand, but paused before reading it. She looked at Valentina, at Jenna, at me. "You read it," she said, handing me the page. "This all started because you didn't give up." I stepped forward, the page trembling in my hands. "This was never about revenge," I said. "It was about visibility. About ending the silence that predators like Caleb count on. We were told we were too emotional, too gullible, too dramatic, but all we were was right." Subscribe to hear the concluding part of the story. The official sentence came 2 weeks later. 37 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for the first 25. Elena and I sat in the back row of the courtroom, flanked by Marcus and Layla, while Valentina stayed home with Sebastian, watching the verdict unfold on the live feed. Caleb didn't react when the sentence was read. No outburst, no plea, just a slight tilt of his head as if doing mental math with the years. The judge called his crimes a prolonged and calculated campaign of emotional and financial abuse. Caleb was led away in shackles, wearing a suit that no longer fit, the courtroom doors closing behind him with a satisfying echo. We didn't throw a party or pop champagne that night. Instead, we made dinner in Elena's new apartment. Stir-fried noodles, ginger tea, and homemade dumplings, using our grandmother's recipe. Valentina sat on the floor with Sebastian sleeping in her arms, his tiny chest rising and falling like proof that the future was breathing. Elena toasted with sparkling water, holding her glass up between us. "To truth," she said quietly, "and to never mistaking silence for peace again." Elena's firm had offered her a sabbatical, but she declined, choosing instead to take on a pro bono case involving digital stalking. "I know what it's like to feel like you're being hunted online," she told me. "Now I want to help other women fight back before it ever gets that far." She changed her area of specialty: cyber harassment and identity fraud, making her one of the most in-demand attorneys in the city within 6 months. The judge who sentenced Caleb even referred clients her way, calling her, quote, "tenacious with a backbone built from stone." She framed that quote above her new desk, right beside a picture of her and our parents. Valentina published an essay 6 months later under a pen name, called "What I Named My Son When I Got My Name Back." It went viral almost instantly, shared across parenting forums, trauma recovery blogs, and digital rights platforms. She never mentioned Caleb by name, but everyone knew. She ended the piece with a single sentence that read, "He tried to write our story, but I gave my son the pen." Publishers offered her book deals within weeks. Jenna started a foundation called EchoSafe, a nonprofit that connects survivors of financial abuse with legal and forensic accounting support. Priya joined the board, and Marcus volunteered to create the analytics engine that detected scam patterns using public records. Elena consulted on the legal framework, while Valentina created a series of webinars on recognizing red flags in early-stage relationships. I handled logistics and operations, finally using my years of work experience to build something that made the world safer. We called ourselves the 13 behind closed doors, a name born not from victimhood, but from alliance. A year later, we all gathered at Elena's home for Sebastian's first birthday. He was walking by then, wobbly steps across hardwood floors, giggling when he fell into Valentina's arms. Noah was there too, now 4, helping open gifts and handing wrapping paper to Aunt Jenna. Elena held him while Valentina cut the cake, and I snapped a picture right before he sneezed frosting all over her blazer. The photo made it onto the fridge, taped beside courtroom sketches, baby announcements, and the first page of Lila's FBI report. In the quiet that followed the party, Elena and I stepped onto her balcony, the city skyline shimmering in the distance. "I still think about the wedding sometimes," she said, staring into her glass. "How different everything could have been if I hadn't looked up and seen you standing there." I turned to face her. "I almost didn't come back." She smiled. "But you did." We stayed like that for a while, listening to the sounds of laughter from the kitchen, the low hum of life continuing. "I don't hate him anymore," she said finally. "But I'll never forgive him either." I nodded. Forgiveness isn't a requirement for healing. Sebastian toddled out onto the balcony then, tugging at Elena's pant leg with a determined grunt. She scooped him up with practiced ease, resting him on her hip like she'd been doing it for years. "He looks like her," Elena said, kissing the top of his head. "But he has your stubbornness," I laughed. "That's the highest compliment you've ever given me." That summer, we held a private conference in Chicago for survivors of romantic financial abuse. Over 100 women attended, some who had followed the trial, some who found us through EchoSafe. The opening panel featured Jenna, Valentina, Elena, and me, sitting in armchairs with no stage, no microphones, just shared stories. "The truth isn't just what brings justice," Elena said that day. "It's what keeps you from forgetting who you were before the harm." In the final session, a woman asked how to trust again after betrayal. Valentina answered without hesitation. "You don't wait for trust to return," she said. "You build it yourself, brick by brick, until you're standing inside something no one can knock down." That quote would later be carved onto a plaque in the EchoSafe headquarters lobby. We all signed it, beneath our initials, not our full names, just the parts of us that survived. On the second anniversary of Caleb's conviction, a small package arrived at my apartment. Inside was a handwritten note on hotel stationery from Lisbon, unsigned but unmistakable. Some stories never end. Some just hide better. There was no return address, no fingerprints, no other contents. I forwarded the photo to Layla, who confirmed Caleb had no contact access from prison. We didn't panic. We documented. Then we locked our doors and told each other what we already knew. Predators want silence. But we weren't silent anymore. We were a network. Sebastian turned 3 the next spring, and I gave him a book of fairy tales rewritten with heroines who never waited for rescue. Valentina smiled as she read them aloud, her voice soft and unwavering. Elena watched from the kitchen, her own book in hand, a manuscript draft she was editing for a friend testifying in a separate trial. We'd become experts in truth. And we weren't done yet. At dinner that night, Elena lifted her glass again, just sparkling water as always, and smiled across the table. "To stories," she said, "the ones we tell, the ones we rewrite, and the ones we end before they're finished writing us." We raised our glasses, and then we began the next chapter. Thank you for listening to Sarah's story. If you're yet to subscribe, please consider doing so before watching another story on the channel.